everybody, and we've got a number logging in now, so I can see just people coming through. So we've got a fantastic discussion ahead of us today, looking at diversity, inclusion and retention in the workplace and what this means for gender diversity. So we've got globally about, I think it's somewhere around 10,000 private equity firms, over 4 billion or 4 trillion, should I say, assets under management. And they've got incredible influence. I think in North America alone, they own about 20,000 companies. And with that kind of influence, if PE firms would continue to reduce gender and racial inequalities across the companies they control, they really can change the face of the business. So it's a brilliant industry when we look at sort of influencers of change for a better future, and an amazing discussion that we've got ahead of us. So we've really got a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to transform employment models and be more inclusive. And it's our responsibility to act now. So a couple of facts for you. According to the World Economic Forum, the impact of COVID-19, God forbid that word, has increased the global gender gap by a generation. So from 99 years to 135 years, which those figures are daunting. In the US, I think 2.5 million women have left the workforce since the pandemic struck, and that's in comparison to 1.8 million men. So the amazing Kamala Harris, the VP of the United States, has called COVID-19 and its impact on the female workforce as a national emergency. So there's some real change afoot. I think we're at an inflection point, and we really want to take today to look at the opportunity that we've got to make positive change. And I know that the University of Southampton did a study as well, saying 73% of employees would prefer to work from home some of the time. And EY's March 2021 Work Reimagined survey looked at 67% of the UK employees would prefer hybrid working, and women and most likely millennials aged 25 to 40 sort of fall within that category. So we really want to promote organisations not being rigid. So I think we've got a number who have joined already. So we will kick off and I will introduce our amazing guest panel. Really, really privileged to have the three that we've got today. So first, Dimple Mystery. So Dimple leads human resources for a global sovereign wealth fund and investment asset manager, GIC, in Europe. And Dimple has over 20 years HR experience, with the last 14 of which being at GIC. But most importantly, Dimple is an active member of the Diversity Project. So she's part of the steering group, vice chair of the Race and Ethnicity work stream, member of the Neurodiverse work stream as well. And to top it all off, also sits as a HR trustee at a local secondary school, looking at DE&I and staff wellness focus. So welcome, Dimple. Second, we've got Lucy Heinz. So Lucy is fund head for Actus Energy and board chair for 2 of Actus's renewable energy platforms. Lucy is also responsible for coordinating ESG and impact-related efforts for the energy infrastructure team, and works closely with Actus specialist responsible investment team as well. She chairs Actus's remuneration and inclusion and diversity committees, so has some amazing experience to draw on. So yeah, welcome, Lucy. Finally, but not least, we have Pamela Brent. So Pamela is part of the investment team at an amazing new private equity company called Woven Light. They're actually using data science to build the next generation of private equity, and she works across origination, execution, and the portfolio work streams. Pam is a passionate advocate for greater gender diversity in private equity and works again with Level 20 and also GAIN. So that's Girls Are Investors, to inspire young women to join and progress within the investment industry. So thank you all again for being here. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So to kick off, first question, and we'll put this to Lucy, if that's okay. So Lucy, is remote working versus being in the office a good thing or a potential disaster in the making in respect of gender inclusivity?
Thank you, Ed. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So I'm going to quickly try and frame this debate, because a good thing would be because the pandemic has demonstrated that we can all do flexible working, and the historic traditionalist arguments have been turned on their head. And flexibility is often cited as a key change that would enable women to remain in career roles. A bad thing, because research is telling us, as the stats Ed has given us as well, that women have taken on more caring and household duties. And the risk is clearly that women become more invisible away from the office. And so there's a kind of so what that I see is that, hybrid models, which seem to be the kind of route we're potentially heading in the direction of going forward, may mean that more women choose to stay at home and spend more time there, and more men return to the office. And that then creates more barriers than we ever had before in terms of an in-crowd and inclusion. This is a very, very brief summary. There's so many arguments, and I'm sure Dimple and Pam will pick up on other aspects as well. So kind of what I think is that I've worked remotely for 18 years, 2 days a week from home, 2 to 3 days a week in the office. I have 4 daughters. We're a 2-career family. We live in the northeast of the UK. And I experienced all of that invisibility, and I needed to work much harder in terms of brand, image, and exposure. But it's also really easy to make gender-biased assumptions, and we shouldn't overgeneralize, because, of course, there are men who choose to work from home and take on more caring duties or have other interests, indeed. And there are many women, including myself, who will return to the office with some delight. Perhaps wear different clothes, different shoes, all of those things will be great, see colleagues. So I think where you get to is kind of what is important. And I think that it's really important that companies recognize that flexibility is possibly here to stay, and that coaching and support is provided to all employees to enable them to progress their careers, make the most of Zoom, which actually in itself can be more inclusive. And I think we have a question on that coming up, particularly compared to kind of faceless voices over those horrible Polycom bat phones that we used to have in our offices. I think it's really important that we retain and go further on inclusion and diversity. And I would like to kind of point you towards some research by Harvey Coleman, which is often cited in our kind of women's forums at Actus, which is that there's some stats. Career progression is 60% exposure, 20% image, and 10% performance, which I think just really highlights the job that's in front of us proactively as we think about these hybrid models going forward. I hope I stuck to 5 minutes. Ed, back to you.
Yeah. You brush over the trailblazing of the 18 years of already adopting this model, Lucy, and an insane schedule, no doubt that's had as well. But just the progression that you've seen in respect of that 18-year period, has it just been condensed into the last year, or has it sort of progressively got better, would you say?
I think it's progressively got better. And I think what I notice is, I mean, it sounds a bit superficial in some ways, but 2-career families, that creates a kind of mindset shift among your peer group. Millennials joining the workforce with just different demands and different views. Social media and the kind of interconnectedness of people. Those things all predate the pandemic, but have kind of exemplified them, or the pandemic has accelerated them. And the other thing I think is, as you see peers, becoming parents and thinking about the next generation more as well, it also contributes to a mindset shift. It would be superficial to say that's the whole thing, but I do see factors changing around me, as well as what, female peers and colleagues, do themselves in terms of pushing things forward.
Excellent. And Pam, I mean, you obviously had the opportunity to join a fund that has a new perspective on things. What's your view on whether this is a disaster in the making in respect of gender inclusivity, or a good thing?
I think, absolutely academically, it ought to be groundbreakingly positive for women. I think you know, as Lucy said, I think historically maybe if people have been part-time or flexi, that has definitely been women doing those roles. I think now we're showing that, you know, men are spending more time at home. They've actually spent a lot more time with their families over the last year, and I think they've started to be slightly more, I'm huge sweeping generalization here, but slightly more interested in that side of things and wanting to spend a bit more time at home as well. And fundamentally, we've proven that we can do this job remotely. This is historically a job that requires a lot of time in the office and time in meetings and time traveling. And we've shown that we can do that all remotely, and therefore people shouldn't be excluded from the workforce just because they want to work from home a little bit more. You know, practically speaking, my friends who are, you know, pregnant at the moment, if you've got horrible morning sickness, you don't have to commute and be in the office and rushing off to the toilet every 3 minutes to throw up. And that's amazing that we can do that, and people can actually do their job better working from home in some circumstances. You touched on the fact I've joined a new firm. We're actually 100% remote at the moment because we're a new firm. We don't have an office. We do think that hybrid working is important, and we will be moving to an office in due course. But we're definitely looking at kind of the optimum mix of in the office versus at home, combining the flexibility of what people want out of their lives, and maybe a little bit more time at home, with the benefits that come from working in an office. So I think particularly in terms of teamwork, collaboration, that's much easier in a single forum. And as Lucy said, there are, you know, when it comes to career development, learning from other people, and that visibility of being there, and therefore the ties to promotion, I think that is still a little bit easier in the office. Obviously relies on managers as well. The culture of the firm, recognizing people are still working if they aren't visible, and recognizing, you know, maybe changing that dynamic from 10% of performance, pushing that further, and recognizing that performance is perhaps more important than visibility.
How have you found you touched on the culture aspect, and this is probably an unfair question given your employers might be watching, but just that sort of, it's interesting being put into that environment where you are completely 100% remote, and you're sort of trying to build, you know, sort of your presence in the firm, etc. So just how have you found that experience?
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I mean, we make sure we have daily catch-ups with my line manager, and then on top of that, it's been quite important just to schedule chats with people around the firm in different departments. I work closely with our data science team, and making sure that I'm having, you know, calls with them for no reason. I just put a call in the diary, and then we just you know, try and getting those water cooler moments.
Yeah.
And trying to do that and get to know the rest of the team, understand exactly what they're working on, and just working out how you fit in around them. And so, yeah, that stuff is a bit harder, and you have to make a more conscious effort to do it. That's definitely true.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, there's experience that I've had recently where we all came back together, and the funny thing is about that is actually made that time kind of more, it's more special, that you actually, you know, sort of that experience is all new, so you actually sort of valued it much more than ironic just sort of rolling into work every day, where you probably take that bit for granted. So, and Dimple, I mean, you've obviously got a holistic oversight sort of point of view from a HR perspective. What's your view on this?
So to me, I think it can be good or bad, and there's a mix. I mean, I completely agree with Pamela and Lucy that it works, it happens. I suppose I come from an environment where we started off quite differently, where working from home was actually quite unusual. We were very office-based. So COVID was a massive surprise to the organisation, but the great thing was we were able to adapt very quickly and set up. I would say that really is quite dependent on the systems, the policies, the people, and the culture that you have within an organization as to whether diversity or gender diversity and inclusion goes the right way or the wrong way. And of course, it depends on your manager and the team culture, because you have the organizational culture, but then what's your team culture like? And does the organization culture filter down into that team environment? If you have an understanding manager, your manager is an advocate of you and supportive of you, then you would hope that you as a female working from home, you would feel more comfortable and assured that you won't blend into the background or you'll be missed out on certain things. So I think that's actually very, very important. And networking, connecting with people, as Pamela mentioned, those sort of water cooler moments are missed sometimes. So just trying to book in video calls is often a good thing. I think there's some really interesting developments. So flexibility is here to stay. I think it would be very difficult for an organization to say to people, you have to come back 5 days a week, just as we were before. So does that mean that a whole new workforce is available to us? There's a lot of women in the investment profession that have come out of the profession as a result of families or commuting, whatever it might be. Now, if we are thinking about job sharing, part-time working, hybrid working, then there's a whole new market that's available to employers, and we should really capitalize on that. Also, another thing, a concept that sometimes can be debatable is that we've all got the same space. Sometimes you're in a meeting with differing people, let's say men and women, since we're talking about gender, and the man can be very sort of bold and command the room, as they say. But actually the Zoom box is the same now. And therefore we all have the same opportunity. It's just that the quieter, more introverted people may struggle. And that doesn't necessarily mean women, it can mean anyone. And so therefore we have to learn to interrupt, we have to learn to hold our space, even in a Zoom call. So in a way, it is a little bit more exclusive. Everyone's invited to meetings, sometimes too many meetings, but we've all got the same space on the screen. So that's quite interesting. But we do have to learn to be completely present. Also, if you think about, and I guess some of this is related to family environments, but the roles may have flipped ever so slightly at home. Men are no longer able to get away with just saying, I'm working late in the office. They're actually at home and having to potentially share the burden, not the burden, shouldn't say that, share the responsibilities at home, be it cooking, picking up kids, ironing, whatever it may be. So there's an opportunity there to address some of the balances and raise awareness, even in your home environment, of the responsibilities that women often shoulder. The McKinsey report talked about how women are often working 3 to 5 extra hours a day because of home responsibilities as well as their home job. So, that's really bad, because heightened anxiety, heightened stress is obviously an issue there. But at the same time, I hope that the men in the families are stepping up as well, and the children as well, because of course they can help out as well.
Yeah,
so that's my perspective.
And there's some really interesting insights in terms of, because I think there's different dynamics going on for both genders. And interestingly, someone else was talking about the fact that males, or the male gender group, has seen this as an opportunity in the last year to potentially look at other opportunities. Female has seen this as the female gender group has seen this as a risk to losing their job. And so there's that mentality difference that we have to appreciate. It's not going to be present in every single person, but that element of that one-on-one contact to coach people through and understand how they're perceiving the current situation and also the amount of change that's going on. Is there anything in respect of creating policies? Do you think that's going to be an effective way to kind of look at this for companies themselves, to have policies in place in how they look at this in the new working world, as it might be called?
Well, you really do need to relook at everything, to be honest, and ensure that with a fine-tooth comb, you go through those policies and see if there is some indirect negativity or non-inclusion of different types of working situations as well as characteristics. I think this is a great opportunity to look at data and really sort of step back and say, right, what is the composition of our workforce? What does that mean? And how can we now leverage on this workforce and ensure that there's inclusion? Because ultimately you can have diversity policies, but when you're if you don't then include them or make people feel included, then that's an issue. Finally, there's the intersectionality of it all as well. You can be a female who's an ethnic minority, who's also neurodiverse, a single parent, etc., etc. And then how does that then layer on when it comes to policies and procedures that we may have in the workplace? And, you know, things like, how do we advertise for roles? Is there any language within the policies that may be exclusionary in its own makeup? It's a bit of a complex topic, but it is an opportunity to step back.
I think actually one of our guests sort of mentioned, and this kind of leads on to the next question, is there sort of an optimum balance working from home and in the office? And I think that's the sort of pressing question for most people, but it kind of leads into our second question, which is what initiatives, ideas can firms adopt that really have that kind of long-term opportunity for successful inclusivity? So I don't know if Pam, you want to kick off with that one, but yeah, just around ideas and initiatives.
Sure, and I'd say probably we're in a pretty good position because we don't have a status quo. So we're, rather than kind of looking back across the status quo and trying to see what we can do differently, it's actually a bit more open start to things, and we say, okay, how are we going to start, which gives us a little bit more of an opportunity. And actually one of the things that we are doing, which is different, is we are hiring part-time roles into our investment team. But, you know, Lucy clearly is an old hand at this, but, you know, I think across most of the private equity industry, it's extremely rare to have that kind of flexibility, but that's something we're looking at. And it you know, to a certain extent, it will be an experiment to see how we deal with that, especially in really crunch times when things, you know, are very, very difficult. But I think that's something we're willing to, you know, pursue and to challenge ourselves to adapt in order to make sure that we are getting the people who want those roles. And so actually, I think it's pretty exciting time to try and embrace, as you say, different approaches. And you know, remote working will make that so much easier than, you know, if it was a kind of someone's not in the office and, you know, think 30 years ago before mobile phones, etc., that would almost be impossible, I think, to accommodate. But nowadays, actually, with remote working, I think hopefully that should be a lot easier. And I think, yeah, there was a question in the chat about kind of, does that mean one model for everyone? No, absolutely. I think it's what suits people. If someone needs to go and pick up their kids in the middle of the day but wants to log on later, you know, that's something we can all do now. And I think that should be fully encouraged and embraced. And as you say, like, I think people being more involved in other aspects of their lives probably makes them happier, healthier employees, and that's good for everyone. So no, I think that's very encouraging. And actually, just touching on that, as you know, I think actually it's been really good to see the guys at home during this period. I've seen a lot of male colleagues kind of sitting there having to dandle the baby on their lap while they're doing the call, and you know, really embrace those challenges as well. And actually, I do think that leads to greater inclusion, because suddenly women aren't outsiders dealing with this problem that guys don't have to deal with. It's, oh, I really acknowledge how difficult this is, and then everyone's kind of on the same page.
It's interesting that element of because I'll go to you, Lucy, but your situation, as I assume, would have naturally evolved into kind of this remote working, but that part-time element. I've never once in 18 years had a client request someone to work, you know, sort of say the opportunity is part-time in an investment role. I mean, lots of people talk about how many hours they're going to have to dedicate to the role, but you know, but it's a really, because even when you said that, I thought, actually, do you know what? There's huge amounts of individuals that would find that hugely appealing if they could get that opportunity. So I don't know, Lucy, what's your view on that?
I agree with you. It's not that people usually ever advertise part-time roles. And I worked 4 days a week for 10 years until my youngest went to school, and didn't really ever feel like part-time. I don't think 4 days a week necessarily qualifies. It just means your evenings and weekends are kind of slightly different. But I do think this situation is challenging us to think differently. And that's the great thing, in terms of, if you can open up flexibility, then you start to open up other aspects as well. Like, you know, do you have, and the times of day that work best for people, you know, and Zoom is also, the flip side of that has been this sort of always onness of it, where because everything is massively overscheduled, because you've got to book a call with someone, even if it was a kind of effective water cooler chat, that's created, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, this kind of feeling of always on, which is where we've had to kind of navigate things culturally a bit in terms of taking feedback from the team. So I think, it's raising a great conversation, and it's kind of more than about time that it actually happened. And, as the pandemic has just taught us all that, those traditionalist models can be turned upside down, and we can work from home. We can all work from home without terrible things happening. And that, perhaps was a surprise to some when this whole thing started. Just in terms of the question, I agree with Pamela. I think it depends on the role and the culture and the person, because different things work for different people. But I come back to the same point about proactively managing your career, as well as companies needing to provide support. At Actus, very quickly, we're a work in progress. We have, and this is to answer your question, Ed, we have an intentional strategy now around inclusion and diversity. We started informally, and then now we've moved to kind of having an annual strategy with clear goals and objectives, and a working group that kind of is the thought leadership group on that. And I think it's lots of things that create change. It's kind of strands for us of basic hygiene, which kind of answers Dimple's policies point, and kind of refreshing and looking at those. It's a bit of peer benchmarking and making sure that, from an LP perspective, we match up. And then it's a bit about authentic leadership, which very much is what Actus aspires to be about in other aspects as well. What feels important in terms of the time I've spent on this, and I'm really not an expert, but it comes around tone from the top, and really visible support of the strategy. The linked performance is really, really important. And I've just read a brilliant book by Matthew Syed called Rebel Ideas, which I'd really recommend, because it takes away gender, but it just thinks about diversity. And that's really interesting from a neurological point of view. It's really important to have real initiatives that create change. You see lots of stuff on websites, but actually thinking about where you want to get to and what does success look like is really important. So you don't just run in all directions, and you think carefully. And I think it's really important that it links to what we do. So Actus, we have 120,000 portfolio company employees, and we have very much decided that it's linked to what we do in our value creation and linked to our portfolio and investment activities as much as it is about our culture. And sometimes our portfolio companies are leading us. We bring all our energy and infrastructure portfolio companies together once a year, and the plenary session at our offsite for that last year was on inclusion and diversity, and they taught us as much as, it was a very much a balanced exchange of ideas, and it's great to be kind of stimulated and pushed from them as much as us kind of suggesting from above.
Thank you. The parts that have had the greatest impact, Lucy, because I think the biggest thing that I see with all of this is companies often just want ideas and suggestions, and they really, it's a behemoth of an aspect to tackle. So where you've seen the greatest kind of immediate impact in some of those initiatives for Actus?
So last year, one of the things we did is we had a portfolio mentoring program over the last 2 years, which was where we had a mentoring program specifically for minorities and diverse people from our portfolio companies, mentored by people in Actus and our kind of networks. That was extraordinary. It worked both ways in terms of really understanding and opening up people's perspectives and understanding different people's journeys, as well as, providing a lot of support to those mentees. We've had a leadership program for women, which has worked really well. Although it does kind of spill over to then, well, how do you want the rest of the organisation to change around you? Because it cannot just be one group that kind of drives this. There has to be kind of more holistic change. We had some great speakers and events around race and ethnicity last year, which were very powerful. We're actually quite a diverse organisation, not necessarily at all levels, but we are overall 65% racially diverse. So that was very, very powerful and important. This year, we have a reverse mentoring program, which is our kind of one of our projects for this year, which I think has got real potential to be transformational, because again, sharing perspectives, understanding different people's point of view is really important. This year, we have inclusive leadership as the cornerstone of every training program at Actus, so it's been designed with that in mind. And we've talked about water cooler chats, and what we have is a sort of initiative by the partners to have 3 coffees a quarter with people from around the organisation, not people you would normally speak to, but just somebody you don't know very well. And again, with the objective of trying to create connections and share perspectives and kind of create that cohesion that you lack when you're all just on a little box on a screen. And there's masses more, but I'll stop there.
No, I mean, there are lots of stuff that you can immediately, as I say, implement. And I think that's the key thing, is just as we're facing kind of this overwhelm of, even some of these new statistics that are coming out, is just sort of trying to work out, again, sort of individual approach for your firms, but some of those might be ideas taken from others. And this is a universal thing. If we can all make for a better workforce, then it's going to hopefully have a really sort of positive impact as well. Dimple, I don't know whether you've seen yourself any kind of initiatives that have that opportunity for success.
There are quite a few out there. I mean, we're still work in progress, a bit like Actus as well. And we've set up a global group now looking at diversity and inclusion with regional responsibility. So I'm co-champion with a lady called Yvonne O'Mara from private equity. And we focus on, diversity and inclusion matters. And we have a mix of HR and the business as well, which is great. So one big thing is senior leadership advocacy. As mentioned already, it has to be led from the top. These things can't just be an HR initiative that HR are just driving. So it's really important. So our backer is our CEO. And what we've done is we've very much brought the business in with HR. So we're all working together to develop programs, initiatives that will gradually move us to an environment where we are able to say, categorically talk about how diverse and inclusive we are. Now, another thing that we need to think about is inclusivity and diversity built into the organizational values, as well as the whole performance management structure and everything else. So we have respect. Respect has been in our values for a very long time, and that's just respecting everyone for who they are and accepting everyone for who they are. And that is something that I can say that definitely exists within, well, certainly from my experience, it exists. And harnessing diversity isn't just gender, it's all of the different characteristics that exist, but also diversity of thought, diversity of experience. You know how it is. We're so hell-bent on having associates, 3 years investment banking experience, for example, educated at Cambridge and Oxford. So how can we look at this slightly differently? So diversity is such a wide topic with lots of layers as well, as I've mentioned before. Increasing awareness and understanding of protected groups or other diverse communities and characteristics is absolutely key. Not everyone understands what Asperger's is. Not everyone understands what it's like to be a female in the investment industry, for example. So that's something that we're focusing on. And we're just currently working on some awareness building sessions around all of the various layers that exist within the category of diversity. And with that, there'll be some really frank, courageous conversations around this as well, where people are in a safe space to speak openly about what it means and what is it, because quite often that is, something that people just don't know what it is, and how do we feel walking in those shoes. Mentorship. So we have a mentorship program within the office, which is quite successful. It's about 20% of our workforce are involved, mentors and mentees, and we have quite a few managing directors in there as well. So it's really great that that's working so well. And again, there's a lot of diversity within that group, but something we should explore is the cross-company schemes. So for example, Level 20 offer mentorship programs. City Hive are just launching a cross-company mentorship program specifically for females and ethnic minorities. And I think that, organizations should try and support this initiative. Having ambassadors, I can talk about this for ages, as you can tell. Having ambassadors, allies, and advocates in the organization is really important. As a female, it's really great to know that you have an ambassador for you, or even if you're not part of a formal mentoring program, do you have someone that you can speak freely with, someone who provides that safe space and gives you that guidance? Quite often that's integral. We also have coaching for all staff, actually, career coaching that we offer to everyone to help them see what their career strategy should be, because the career strategy isn't just for you. There's not one model that will work for you. Everyone's so different. So how do you leverage on your strengths and make the best use of them. Working parents, we should really be looking at how we can match male and female benefits. So, for example, we match shared parental leave with shared parental pay with our company maternity pay. So it enables fathers to be present for their children. Also, we have to stop with the tokenistic words and everything else. It really should be driven by action. So my view is, even if you don't take lots and lots of action, if you take little steps, they are far better than making grand statements about what you are as an organization and then doing nothing, because actually we're all so savvy nowadays that most people see beyond those words. So, how do we support initiatives like GAIN at the grassroots level, 10,000 Black interns, organizations like City Hive, the Diversity Project, Impetus, and then you have the other side, which is the Social Mobility Foundation, Inter University, Upreach. They have an investment springboard. How can we support these initiatives that will really make a long-term change within our industry when it comes to inclusivity? And also, look at the results. What does your workforce show you? Gather the data. This is something that we're working on at the moment. Gather the data and take the results seriously, which will help shape your diversity and inclusion strategy moving forward, but also be really open with staff and communicate with them as well. So they're the sort of things that that come to mind.
No, definitely. There's some really interesting points, and one you raised there about sort of token efforts and firms not doing that just as a sort of quick win, as it were. And I think one element which sort of leads into my final question around the pressures that both genders face and that can't be solved with token gestures, as it were. So the mental health issues that can potentially arise from these new pressures that individuals face from both, as I say, from both genders. So, Lucy, in terms of your thoughts around that, and do you think we're fully aware of all the pressures that people are facing?
I don't think so. I think we're starting to be. But I think, for example, we have colleagues in portfolio companies in India who are having the most horrible time right now. You can't even imagine the stress that potentially is causing. That's very palpable and tangible. But I think when this is over, when we emerge to some kind of, as we are doing certainly in the UK, but not in other places, we will only see the effects of this coming out over time, this prolonged period of uncertainty, anxiety, juggling, managing children, dependent relatives, isolation. It's different for different people and the pressures that you have. But I think it will only surface. You'll see some now and some over time as people have sort of trauma in one way or another. And I use that word quite carefully. My 3 teenagers, something that mental health is the issue of their generation. And in some ways, it's great that there's a language now around this. It's something that you talk about, but I do think we are still all a kind of work in progress. Maybe some comments on what Altus is doing. We have had a fabulous wellbeing team who have really brought the firm together, even virtually. In some ways, this has worked better virtually because everyone's been able to join in over the last 15 months. And we've had sessions on sleep, resilience, boundaries, nutrition, health, exercise sessions, and that's worked really, really well. In our portfolio, we've had teams do fitness together. They've made TikTok videos. I don't know anyone who saw the blinding lights by the weekend TikTok craze last year. We had a few of those. That was great. And on a more serious note, we've done a lot of sharing best practice between companies. So we had regular all the way through. We have regular all region check-ins. Learning from colleagues. So, for example, one of our energy businesses in Mexico has made much more mental health support available to all employees, construction workers, to people operating at the company level. And we've worked with communities a lot and switched our programs around that much more to kind of COVID support. And we've provided support for online schooling as well, which all contributes. I'm not saying that we're nailing it, but we're certainly work in progress in terms of contributing to looking after those who are more vulnerable. In terms of what we could do better, I think there's so much more we could do in terms of more mental health support and counselling. schools are thinking much more about this in terms of mental health first aid. There's a long way to go, and as I say, this is something that's going to be with us for quite a long time as we sort of return to, in different ways, some kind of form of more normal, what we think of as more normal life.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's really interesting when you talk about that aspect of this is the topic of their generation, that it's not going to just be solved and suddenly we all kind of move on. And I don't know, Dimble, in terms of your take on how we can help with the mental health and sort of the impact that is going to be made from this, especially for those generations coming through. And it'd be interesting, Pam, also to look at GAIN as well, just as an aspect of that, and whether they've started to touch on this as well.
I mean, the strain on mental health over the last year and a half is it's been immense, actually, in my opinion, and hidden. And that's the scary thing about it all. It's really easy to hide when someone's struggling, because you know that you just have to look okay for that Zoom call, and you just need to sound okay for that phone call, but then you're despairing in the background afterwards. It's a real worry for me, I guess, on a personal basis, as well as my responsibility as HR lead at GIC in Europe. But it's a tough one, and I wouldn't even class it to be gender related to some degree. I mean, there's also the differences in age as well, like where, the big concern has been probably the staff that are in smaller accommodation, got the lockdown, they're not with family, and they're in this one flat, quite often flat sharing, and it's just must be very, very difficult. We've been very concerned about this, actually, and of course it's my role to make sure that we're equipped to try and deal with this. So empathy, understanding, support has been very, very key. So what we've done is we've run a number of programs for our managers and leaders about being empathetic towards their teams, their staff, showing up as leaders, because actually teams look to you to guide them more so during these times as well. And especially with the heightened insecurity sometimes that women, I don't like the word ethnic minorities, those from ethnic backgrounds, etc., may experience. So we stepped up our mental health first aiders. We have about 16 in our office, and we have only 174 in our office anyway. So 16 is a nice percentage. And again, a number of MDs have taken part in becoming mental health first aiders. We have Mental Health Awareness Week, which must not pass us by. And so we're not running a number of initiatives reminding people of the employee assistance program. That's something that we have been doing throughout, and just constantly reminding managers as we speak to them, have you checked in with your staff? Have you checked in with your team? It's actually quite simple to get this right to some degree. And we're building a program right now about how do we ease ourselves out of lockdown. We sort of got into lockdown and then got very anxious in the third lockdown, but it's now the lockdown is going to be lifted. So how do we equip our staff? Because it's different level of anxiety now, because it's like, oh my gosh, I've now got to think about coming back to the office, commuting, when I haven't been on a train for a whole year. So we're trying to build a resilience program, or just a more psychological driven program around how do we equip ourselves. We ran virtual classes, guided meditation classes, sound baths, gong baths, and we're in the process of setting up something called virtual coffee meetings, like coffee roulettes. It's like we spin the wheel and then you just have coffee with someone randomly. So that's something that we're keen to do. But in the meantime, the president in the office and the various leaders have been connecting with staff as much as they can, and just ask the question, how are you? It's really easy to just launch into business when we have Zoom calls, and to be very formal during Zoom calls. So just a bit of time space allowed for just talking about how you are.
No, definitely. And then we're going to go and open it up to questions in just a moment. So please do, if you've got any questions, I know that we've had one in already, which we'll come to, but if you've got any questions at all, please do pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer all of those. But just briefly, Pam, in terms of your experience around that last question.
Yeah, I think it's something we're definitely looking into. I think there's quite a few apps around mental health that we're looking at to that kind of provide kind of more of a kind of, I guess, outsourced support for employees. And so, it's not that you have to go and have a chat to your boss about something very personal, but just giving some kind of access to some kind of release, I think is really important. I think the other thing we've got to kind of be mindful of is when we can get back into an office, not doing 100% switch. As Dimple says, people will have been kind of sitting there hiding quite a lot for quite some time. And I think the idea of going from 100% at home to 100% back to the office would be, I think, quite difficult for a lot of people, not just, practically in terms of kind of going to, grips with commute, dropping kids off, picking them up, it's all this stuff, but also mentally, and just being present in front of someone for 8-12 hours a day is very different to kind of being able to switch off your video camera and go and have a quick breather if you need to. And I think workplaces have got to be quite cognizant of that when we're talking about mental health. Otherwise that could be quite a struggle. I think if you're used to a certain way and automatically just trying to have to switch into 100% it could be quite difficult. And I think Lucy said it, we are at the start of the journey on how to get back to the office on this, and I think we have not seen the consequences of this year yet.
Okay. We'll go on to a couple of the questions. I'll see who wants to answer these. But one individual, Lulu, said she's actually looking at transitioning into this as an industry, so which would be amazing. And just sort of what you'd say is important when pursuing a career looking at HR, wellbeing, diversity, and inclusion. So I don't know whether anyone wants to sort of jump in for that. Dimple, we'll put you on the spot there, given you're in HR.
I need to, could you repeat the question for me? A question popped up for me, so I started reading it and I missed.
No, you're fine. So Lulu's looking to transition into HR, wellbeing, diversity and inclusion, and is learning about this topic at the moment. But what would you say is important when pursuing a career in this field?
Oh, well, I'm not in diversity and inclusion per se, but what's important? Being open, connecting with the business. I think I have to be honest that sometimes HR people can be quite siloed. So I gain a great deal from making sure that I'm very well connected to the business and the team leads and the MDs. And I see what they're thinking and I bounce ideas off them as well. So I would say that once you're in, that's really important, being commercial, but also having a voice and realizing that you are the subject matter expert at times, and making sure that we also educate everyone with regards to issues that should be considered. So, for example, when you think about 5 years ago, mental health was something that, nobody really talked about. And to be honest with you, sometimes diversity inclusion hasn't been very much talked about as well. So, having a voice, making sure that you see what your peers are doing and other institutions are doing, what we can learn from them, but then also making sure you do what's right for the organisation. I hope that helps.
No, definitely. And I'd add to that as well. I think I'm part of the diversity project that I know, Dimple, you're a part of as well. There's so many amazing groups that we've touched on a couple of the names here, but just involving yourself in the dialogue within these groups is incredible, because I think there's a lot of sort of the dialogue that seems to be similar, and then there's some elements of new aspects that get brought into your realm of thinking. And I think just being part of that network, or those networking groups, are brilliant, and obviously helping engender the change. I just asked Lucy, there's a question in the chat here about any particular resources or thought leaders on the subject that you would recommend to follow. And I think you've touched on a couple of them already, but just around that.
So, I mean, there's loads out there. And one of the things we do is we have a kind of a SharePoint site where we put, blogs, articles, books, I think that, if you're looking to kind of get involved, Dimple mentioned EY, or perhaps you did, Ed, earlier. McKinsey produced great research that's easily findable. That's the place to start, because those organizations are really thinking about data, which is really, really important as well. And that's useful if you're trying to open up a conversation in your own organization around, tying it to performance, which ultimately is what, if you get that, then it's a no-brainer. Of course, you should aim to be more inclusive and diverse, because you'll get better performance as a result. And that's certainly the advice I've received. I wasn't a kind of I&D specialist, just a kind of, adventurer on the journey more. And so those organizations provide, there's loads of reading out there, there's lots of blogs, there's lots of events. And you just start to build a picture, and then you see that there are, even coming from this panel, some very common themes from quite different organizations. There's no need to reinvent a new wheel, because there's lots out there to follow, and people are very generous with their advice, and that's really worth having.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the interesting thing for me as well, I've found it's sort of testing your biases, which you might be aware of or you might not be aware of, and trying to read literature that you wouldn't normally go to and that you at times might find challenging. But it's amazing when you start to read that. We touched in our discussion that we Caroline Perez's book and how that sort of was challenging to read, but some amazing insights in terms of the gender differences and even just how infrastructure has been designed for men and aspects like that. Just there's a great question here, and I'll put it to Pam and Lucy, but just in terms of how we can be, because it's interesting looking at the two insights, an active part of change if we're not senior in our organisation. So Pam, I know you're on your way up to partner, obviously. So but it'd be really interesting to get your insight, and then sort of the flip side of that with Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think there's two things you really need to do. I think one is be quite vocal about your wish to lead on change, and funnily enough, it was one of the first things I did when I got to Woven Light, is I kind of actually had a list of things that I thought we could do, and given that the two co-founders are male, I thought, they may be aware of the issues, but they probably haven't read around it quite as much as I have, and I really wanted to drive that change. And so I literally sent an email saying, these are the things I think we should be doing. And I think it also depends on, to a certain extent, some people may not have read around it and may not see the business case for doing it. And, whether it's the right thing to do or not is one thing, but when you can tie it to that business performance, I think it becomes irrefutable. And it's very hard for people to say no at that point. And so I think part of it is just volunteering, and the other part is persuading and telling people why they need to do it and why it's crucial for the organisation. Now, that was pushing an open door for me at Woven Light, but it is absolutely crucial. And I think people are mentioning a lot of the McKinsey research, as well as that just literally just sets it out on paper how important that is. And so it's you do need to be kind of in the welcoming culture that we've mentioned a couple of times that kind of responds to that. But then just put your hand up for it and say, look, this is something I want to do. These are things I want to action.
Yeah, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that, Lucy, but yeah, some great insights.
So I was going to be, it might come across as a little bit bossy, but I think inclusion is about everybody playing their part, and it's about culture. And so everyone has a role to play, junior to senior. And it's really, really important that the junior people in an organisation find a voice, find a way. There's loads of reading out there, how to have a constructive conversation and challenge bias around you, how to make sure that you're included in meeting, how to show up with confidence if that's something that you suffer from. There's a brilliant book called The Confidence Code, which you can look up. Everyone has a part to play in educating themselves. As Pamela says, putting your hand up, but also not being afraid and developing that toolkit that you can challenge and, push that forward, because some of the issue comes because of senior people in the organisation are not really aware of the perspectives and viewpoints of the younger people in the organisation. And that can be challenged by surveys, coffees, reaching out, sharing perspectives. I appreciate that it's an investment to kind of equip yourself with some kind of tools of bravery if it's not necessarily your comfort zone. But there is a part to play for everybody, and that's what actually will create change. It's many pieces coming together, and if you just wait for the kind of top to change, it'll be a much longer journey. So I'd encourage people in a slightly bossy way to get educated, read the books. There's loads out there, and start playing their part and being a bit more of an activist.
Yeah, definitely. The interesting aspect as a business leader myself, I think you know that when people are positive about coming forward and having the confidence to question something and put forward positive suggestions that could enable the business to be better. I love that. You know, I love being challenged on something that I thought was the right way of doing things, but there might be a better way of doing things. I just haven't thought of it myself. So I think that's another aspect. We are fast running out of time. I don't know how you do a sort of a very quick kind of one key takeaway of an amazing session covering a lot of different topics. But yeah, if I just come to you, Lucy, and if you can do sort of what's your kind of key takeaway around this subject that you have.
So for an organisation to be intentional, and for an individual to be an activist, and get kind of engaged with the journey.
Very well put. Follow that, Dimple.
Yeah, really difficult. Action versus words, I think. So you may not be able to achieve change immediately, but small steps towards change is a start. But it has to be based around action. Action,
brilliant. And lastly, Pam.
Yeah, I thought obviously huge list of things for everyone to do, but I think that there are a couple of takeaways that I thought would be great. The career coaching for everyone, portfolio mentoring, some really nice ideas around there, which I will be bringing to my team in due course.
Amazing. It's covered a vast amount of areas in a very small period of 1 hour. So we will follow up this discussion with the recording of this session. We will try to get to the questions that we haven't answered with some feedback, and no doubt we'll also put some a thought leadership piece around it as well. So there'll definitely be follow up. We'll also make sure we try and cover off some of the books mentioned and reading literature that people can get started with, because as we sort of highlighted, I think that's the key thing. But thank you everyone for being here today. I really enjoyed this discussion myself, and I think there's been some really interesting points made. And yes, I appreciate your time, and would love to engage with everyone and continue the dialogue. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon.